Hi, my name is Mhlauli-Moses with theblackHomeschool.com and Healthy Black Woman. Today I'm here with my good friend Shaquita Graham, and I'm always going to look to my notes because she has such a huge resume. Shaquita is the founder and creator of A Tech Co, and she also is a homeschooling mom like myself, so this is a great topic for us to discuss. How are you doing today, Shaquita?
I'm doing great. I enjoyed the holidays, and I'm happy to be here talking with my good friend Noma. How are you?
I'm not complaining. So let's jump in right into our topic. The title of the article that we're going to discuss, which is going to be up at theblackHomeschool.com, is Why Homeschooling Black Kids Counts. Black dolls make white girls cry. And there's actually a video up there. And you sent me this video, and I decided to put it up at theblackHomeschool.com and discuss the topic. So I'll let you tell us what you saw and why you thought it was important to talk about it.
Well, I saw this video on Facebook where apparently maybe it was the moms or some relatives were videotaping little white girls. They may have been, between 3 and 5, maybe at the most 7. One was younger than the other. They were receiving presents from, a relative, and they opened the present up, and there were 2 black baby dolls. And you could see immediately once they recognized that they were disappointed, and then eventually threw the dolls, and one little girl started crying.
Yeah.
And people were sending this around on Facebook, and everybody had their response. So I wanted to talk about it with you and see what you thought, Noma.
Well, the first thing when you told me about the video was, something? Do you know how many little black girls have received white dolls and have been delighted to get a little white doll? And then you contrast that with the little white girl who gets a black doll, and must think it's so horrific or so ugly or such a letdown that she literally throws it down and throws a mini tantrum. I did see the video, and I noticed that the first girl was trying to be a little mature, but it was written all over her face that she was disappointed, to the point that her mother was like, well, what's wrong? And she was like, oh, you could tell she was disappointed. And then the other one was a little less diplomatic and started crying and throwing it. And to me, again, this again always reiterates to me the importance of homeschooling our kids. And when I talk about homeschool, it's so broad. It's not just about yanking your kids out of school suddenly and, confining them to your home and giving them education in the home. Homeschooling is about being, as a parent, being the person who's primarily responsible for shaping how your kid sees themselves and sees the world and understands blackness, appreciates it, and sees that it's not an ugly thing. Because unfortunately, woven into the fiber of the American education system is this little message that tells you that black is ugly, it's inferior, you're going to be struggling, you're going to be challenged in school, you're going to be last, you're not as important. It's always woven in there so intricately, but it still has the effect. And I know I'm doing all the talking, but I just want to point out one thing. With my daughter, she was in school for a little while. She was in school for kindergarten and first grade. And one of the reasons why we pulled her out of homeschool, now there's 100 reasons, but I remember one day where I literally broke down and cried because she told me that another little kid at the school, maybe more than one kid, had actually told her that something's wrong with her skin, that it's too brown. And that kind of brown is brown like poop. So they're literally likening her to fecal matter that smells.
Yeah.
And then another thing is when she was in school, I can remember another time, it's always hard to talk about this, but another time where her snack, I think, was, she used to like goldfish. I don't know if you know these little goldfish cracker snacks. And she also liked applesauce. So that was typically in her lunchbox. No matter what she had packed, that was one of her snacks. And again, she had a gang of white kids tell her that she was disgusting, and all they used was the fact that she liked to take her goldfish and dip it inside her apple sauce. So now she's brown like poop, and she's disgusting because of what she likes to eat. And it gets worse. I mean, I've seen it before where little kids are different, and then they obviously eat different food, and other kids tell them that there's something wrong with the food that they're eating. So again, it always goes back to this thing of somebody's different, which is okay, but the position of that is different makes it ugly is what we're seeing here. So this is a doll that these girls are not used to getting, obviously, or seeing. And that was enough for them to say, this is so, offensive, ugly, or whatever it is, that I don't want it, and I'm even going to cry because it's not even a gift. What do you think?
Well, it was one thing that stood out to me is that the parents or whoever the relative was behind the camera, it sounded like more than one person. They anticipated this reaction and felt that it was funny. Mm-hmm. So again, I homeschool and I created a techco.com because of things like this, because my sons also experienced similar things to where, in preschool, I thought this is my first child. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to preschool. I don't have to talk about anything. We're just enjoying life. And I realized that I had to start to talk to him about race because the little boy told him that he doesn't like brown people. And the administrators and everybody said, he doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't mean this. But even on the correspondent on CNN, what is his name with the light hair?
Anderson Cooper?
Anderson Cooper did a special about how as young white children at a very young age begin to discriminate and see black people in a negative light when they're looking at otherwise just general scenarios. So I think about all of these things, when I created a techco.com, the technology lessons, we use black images and diverse images. And I think that it speaks to the idea that we need to take control of the narrative about our images with our children. So I love to see that people are creating dolls like the Queens of Africa, who at one point outsold Barbie, and then the Ava DuVernay doll. As far as the video and how the little girls reacted, I mean, I've gotten to the point that I really don't care how other people react to us as much as I care about how we react to our image and how we decide to take control of our images. And I think that's the message. The message is that you can't control how someone else sees you, and you're never going to be able to control that. For all I know, these girls were trained this way, or they, for whatever reason, got this message. I can't control that. But what I can control is the image, the idea about who I am and who my black child is, how it's presented to them. And that's why I think that in the public school system and in the media, that's no place for our children to receive that imagery and that information.
The unfortunate part is, and I agree with you, it's more important for us to take charge of how we see ourselves. But unfortunately, as a parent, when you take your kids and you drop them off at school, with the exception of places that I know there are communities that are more diverse, but for the most part across the country, a lot of communities are not that diverse. So when you drop your black kid off at that school, you might have a good idea of who you are. But if that child is overwhelmed and surrounded by people who are contradicting that every day, and for most parents who work and, don't homeschool, that image is more prevalent and more overwhelming, and that message spends more time indoctrinating your child than you. That's just a fact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you drop them off in the morning, and they spend the most of the day at school with those kids who think that way, with teachers who say, oh, that doesn't matter, don't mind that, it's okay, right? And then the teacher, the administrators, the other students, and then after that, if they're, again, exposed to media, whether it's the cartoons, the TVs, again, that message is still going. And that's why I think that sometimes we have to broaden our idea of what homeschooling is. It isn't just about, the textbooks, about, learn your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s. And I'll stress that is important. However, It's also about being the primary person who shapes your child's view of the world and themselves and how they fit into the world and how they're perceived, and stand up for themselves in terms of saying, no, that's not right. But unfortunately for me, and for my child, I was quite honestly unprepared for that because I didn't have that experience. I had the experience of growing up with people who looked like me and having at least some teachers and administrators who looked like me. So it took a long time for me to wrap my mind around the fact that having a child in a different situation means a radically different. Of course, I did get radical and yanked them out of school and homeschool them. It takes a radically different approach because otherwise your children can be damaged by these things that we might think are not that important. So it's obvious I'm a huge advocate of homeschooling, but I would also say that homeschooling goes beyond just teaching your kids your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s, and just reiterate that it's about teaching them who they are, and teaching them the value of who they are. And so that if they come across those messages are not going to overwhelm them and blow them over. And I just wanted to share one last thing. As I was thinking, when I first had my daughter, I stayed home with her, I think, for the first 2 years, and then I put her in daycare. And I remember going to the daycare and picking her up, and again, all these white dolls and all these other toys and stuff, and she's playing with a white doll. So what I did was I went to, I think it was Walmart or something, and picked up a few cheap dolls, but they were all brown. So now she was going to daycare with her own dolls. And they had a policy that kids couldn't bring toys to the daycare for obvious reasons. It creates, you don't bring anything, don't take anything. And I ended up actually donating those dolls to the daycare. And I was saying, as long as my kids are here, and there's other little brown, they were not black as in of African descent. I think one kid was Indian or Hispanic or something. As long as there's a diversity of kids here, there should be a diversity in the dolls. And my babysitter, she's still one of my good friends now. She just hadn't thought about that, but it was an opportunity for me to kind of just inject some vital information. And I'm sure she still has those dolls, and I'm sure that at this point she thinks a little more broadly about, the kids that she's taking care of and how she's educating them and what the images are that she's giving them. So that was an opportunity for her to do something different, and she took it and she absolutely embraced it, which made me happy. But again, you can't always do that. You can't go around controlling every situation everywhere you go.
Sure.
But I think you can at least try.
And I think you brought up some really good points, which really just balanced the two things that I thought about when I saw it. Two things. One is these little girls, for whatever reason, have this impression, apparently, about blackness. These are the same little girls and the same little girls who are already women, who appear on juries, who are prosecutors, who are teachers, who are all of these different things. They have been equipped with this mindset early on. I mean, you can go back to the civil rights movement and see little kids holding signs that we want to keep our school white. You know what I'm saying? Those kids have grown up and they have, done those things that I mentioned and played their role in society. So we have to balance that with, well, how are we preparing our kids? How are we preparing our kids to deal with a society scenario or a jury or a judge or a police officer that sees them as those little girls were able to express and just threw that baby doll down and started screaming and crying. Subconsciously, you start to think, is that how the teacher is feeling when she continually sits my black son in the back of the classroom when I've repeatedly asked her to move him to the front of the classroom? Mm-hmm. There's a study was done in 2012 from the American Sociological Association. They found substantial scholarly evidence that indicates that teachers, especially white teachers, evaluate black students' behavior and academic potential more negatively than those of white students.
Right.
I wonder why. Did they throw their black baby at Christmas time when they were little?
Good question. Good question.
You know, and let me just say this. And when I drop my child off at an institution that my tax money pays for, I don't have time to think about that. And that's why they will not be at a public school. They won't be at a private school. They won't be at a school where I have no say-so in how they're going to be treated and how their image is going to be projected.
Right. And, you know, and I've said this before when we've had these conversations, that this is an ongoing conversation. It's not over. There's going to be more things that happen and that come up that give us more reasons to say, look, you know, we're not saying that everybody was in a position to homeschool their kids, but I'm finding it hard to understand why a parent wouldn't at least consider it, you know, just consider it.
I'm just not in a position to allow my child to be put in what I know can be harm's way.
Absolutely. And of course, you know, talking to another homeschool mom, you're preaching to the choir, barking up the same tree. But you know, we're in total agreement with this, and just the final message is, and I've said this and I continue to say it, is, you know, if you're not able to do it full time, at least be proactive and do it supplementally, part time, your summers, your evenings, your weekends, and start to create that space where your home becomes a learning environment just as much as the school does, so that you're fortifying your kids for what they're going to face out there. And, you know, we've talked longer than we anticipated because, of course, we're both passionate about this topic. But I just want to remind our listeners that this is a segment of Your Black Women, where Black women keep it real. And I like to think that Shaquita and I keep it real every time we come on here. Again, my name is Mhlauli-Moses, and I am the founder of theblackhomeschool.com. And this is Shaquita Graham. Thank you, Shaquita.
Thank you, Noma.
It's always a pleasure. And again, Shaquita is the founder and creator of ATechco.com, and she's also a homeschooling mom, as well as, again, her resume is so long, I'll just leave it there. And once again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening.